now let's talk about behavioral economics. So by changing prices, we will have different choices for different reasons. Like when the winter comes, some people will like to turn the heater on, others will lower it and put on heavier sweaters while they're inside their home. It really depends on their margin utility and how they're going to adjust their budget given the prices of other goods, income effect, substitution effect, right? So basically, like for people that are going to turn on the heater during the winter, they're spending more money on heating their home. They have to adjust their consumption for other goods. For the people that are just going to put heavy sweaters on inside their home, they do not want to adjust their consumption for the other goods, right? And so people would make adjustments to their consumption choices depending on their economic situation. Like for example, a tax on alcohol, what would this do to final price? So as we saw with tax incidence, by putting a tax on something and changing the supply curve, the prices will be higher. But how does this change consumption? Somebody might have to pay more for alcohol if they go out to a restaurant. And so basically they have to adjust their consumption given their budget. So maybe now they don't get appetizers at a restaurant anymore. Okay. Because the prices are higher of the alcohol, they consume less alcohol and they keep the appetizers amount the same, right? So for somebody who even the price is higher for the alcohol, they buy the same amount or maybe one less, but then they buy less appetizers. We'll see that the appetizers are a normal good because the prices are higher, less purchasing power, they're buying less. So income effect is stronger there. But if the price of alcohol goes up and they buy less alcohol, but they get more appetizers, we'll see the substitution effect being stronger there. And so behavioral economics is talking about looking at the economic decisions depending on the person's state of mind. So there is a difference between the old school way of thinking and this new way of economic thinking, where before we didn't consider a person's state of mind, we really just looked at margin utility and focused on that. But now we are starting to look at how, given the state of mind, given your environment, that is going to impact your choices. So some economists believe that people are self-motivated and will make the decision that gives them the most utility, right? That's one way of thinking. But the new way of thinking is showing us, given the environment, your decisions could look irrational to the outside perspective, but you are still being a rational person in your own way of thinking. Okay, so how does this change if someone, like, given your environment, if you were to make a choice out of revenge or optimism or loss, right? So on one way of thinking, when you're reacting out of revenge, this could be hurting you, right? So the old school way of thinking would say you wouldn't do that. That's irrational. But the new way of thinking is saying, given your state of mind, you thought that was rational, so we have to consider that, okay? These are not necessarily irrational states of mind, but rather emotions that need to be considered when we analyze an economy. Thinking back to COVID, where given that state, people could have been making some irrational decisions at the time, but when we really looked at it, they were making the best choice they could at that time. We can investigate on how this affects us. So we could look at how a certain dollar amount can affect different individuals and how they respond. Sometimes the outcome can be inconsistent or irrational to an outside observer. So the traditional way of thinking works like this. If you lost $10 today, but then you got an extra $10 in your paycheck tomorrow, you would be perfectly neutral. Nothing happens. You didn't lose any money, so you're fine. All right? That's the traditional way. But in all actuality, if you lost $10, that hurts you, right? Now, if you got the $10 the next day, how do you feel? Do you feel better? Do you feel the same? Do you feel worse, right? That's where the new way of thinking comes in. Behavioral economists have found that people will actually feel into the negative emotion of losing even more, which could be anger or frustration. And so we like to focus on the loss, not the gain, in that state of mind. And so what happens here, if I were to take away that $10 from you, because of loss aversion, because you lost that $10, it actually pains you 2.25 times more than the $1 helps you. Okay, so basically, the old way of thinking says you lost $10, you get $10, you're the same. But the behavioral way of thinking says if I took $10 away from you, I would have to give you back $22.50 for you to feel the same, right? If I gave you 10 bucks, you would still be upset. You would still have negative utility from this interaction. So that is very important information when we're analyzing an economy, okay? So think about the difference between finding $50 in the street and earning $50 from working. Is there a difference, right? Some might think that the street money has very little value. Easy come, easy go mentality. So if you found $50 on the street, quickly lost it, not a big deal. But if you worked for the $50 and you lost that, that one hurts you a lot more. So that's also got to be considered too. Someone may be more anxious to use their savings to pay off debt, even though it makes economic sense to do so. So on this one, if you have a lot of debt and you're paying like 22% for the credit card, right? Let's say it's $10,000 and you have $10,000 in a savings account, what should you do? Well, if you do not take your savings to pay the credit card debt, you're paying 15% interest on the credit card and you're only earning 2% on the savings account. So what should be better? Even though some people are anxious and don't pay off the credit card because they're going to lose their savings, it actually makes economic sense to pay off the credit card debt first and then accrue your savings, right? That's going to save you more money than what it feels like, okay? So that's why we have to consider this when we analyze an economy, of like how it could seem irrational, but is also something we have to consider, okay? So back at the beginning of this chapter, I did mention that because of the state of being the Great Recession, people did decrease consumption, but we did see an increase in one area, and that area was education spending. People were actually going back to school during this time. So even though people were losing their jobs, they were still spending money on school. The reason this was because unemployment was very high. So basically, you didn't have anything else going on, so you just went to school. Your opportunity cost of school decreased. So more people went to school, got higher education, and then ended up getting their higher salaries, right? So that ends our discussion on Chapter 6. In Chapter 7, we'll talk about production costs.